Chapter 13 and a half. Days pulled out of time, those weeks that were a lifetime, watching him come back. Jessie watched the world spin around her in those days after they found Mark on the mountain. TV cameras, doctors, reporters, police, Mark's parents, including her like she was part of the family. The three of them had driven through the storm and over the mountains, following the path that Mark had taken to Seattle. His mom never put her cell phone down, receiving the updates from the authorities, the search and rescue coordinator, the state police, the National Park Service. She spit the news out as fast as it came in her ear, sharing it with Mark's dad and Jessie. The rescue teams had gone up, through the raging storm, through the darkness and the danger, and they'd found him tucked into a little empty space under a snow ledge. So close to dead that they thought he was. But he wasn't. Not quite. Not yet. Because of the state of the roads, he beat them to the hospital in Seattle, flying through the clouds in a medevac helicopter. Jessie and his parents ran in, escorted by police and shouted at by reporters, and there he was. Scary pale and graveyard thin, lying in bed and hooked up to a jungle of tubes and pumps and beeping machines. He wasn't moving. The doctors had rattled off all the things he had. Frostbite, dehydration, exhaustion, hypothermia, shock, cancer. The whole trip had been too much. The sleeplessness, not enough food, the stress, without his medicine for most of it, and at the very time that his body was beginning to fall apart. He lay without waking for days, and all they could do was sit beside him and wait and listen to the words of the doctors. "He should be dead already," a doctor said once, and Jess had almost punched him. "He shouldn't be dead at all," she wanted to shout back into his face. "He shouldn't even be sick." But punching and shouting wouldn't help, and she didn't want to make her leave. She needed to stay there, with Mark, by his side. She was there when he finally woke up. His eyelids fluttered, and he stirred, and then his eyes opened, and they found hers, alone in the room with him. His parents were out in the hall, talking to the doctors. He smiled, a weak smile. "Hey, Jess." Jess opened her mouth, but no breath would come up from her lungs, like the air was too thin. Her eyes blurred. "Am I dead?" he asked. He didn't sound scared. Jessie shook her head. "No," she answered, her voice a quivering croak. "Oh," Mark answered, his voice peaceful and soft and only mildly surprised. His green eyes were so calm and so wet and bright, and his head was so bald against the whiteness of the pillow. "Good." And that was it. Oh, good. But then, a sudden dark storm in his eyes. He raised his head from the pillow. "What about Beau? Is Beau alive?" Jess blinked, and then blinked again. She looked away from Mark, out the window at the sunlight, thinking of Beau. Then she told him. She told him how the rescuers had started up into the blizzard. There had been a phone hotline tip that Mark had headed up the mountain from Paradise. They hadn't really thought that they had any chance of finding one skinny kid in all that weather on all that mountain. But she told him how, less than a mile from the parking lot, they'd seen the little brown and black dog with the mismatched eyes coming down toward them. Frozen, shaking, barking. She told him how when they tried to pick him up, the dog had run away from them, leading them back up the mountain. She told him how they'd followed that shivering little dog as he floundered through the deep, drifting snow. Even when he'd veered off the trail, they'd followed their guts and stayed with the dog. She told him how he'd barked to warn them of the deadly black crevasse, how he'd hesitated for only a moment before leaping over the crack, barely making it to the other side. She told him how they'd followed that little dog right to where Mark lay, curled up and almost frozen to death. She told him how that little dog had limped all the way back to his boy, and collapsed right there beside him, his chin resting on Mark's frozen gloves. Beau hadn't left him behind, she told him. He'd gone for help, and then brought it back. Mark didn't even wipe at the tears on his cheeks. Jess, did he make it? Is he alive? Jess sniffed and wiped at her eyes and smiled. Yeah, she said, and then she laughed. He's alive. They couldn't get him off you. They had to carry him down on the stretcher right on top of you. The vet's amazed. Says there's no way he should have survived all that. She reached out and grabbed Mark's hand. But he had to survive it. To save you. Dogs die, maybe. But friendship doesn't. Not if you don't let it. Mark was worn down to nothing. His body was withered and wasted away by it all. But his eyes had more life in them than they'd had in ages. He'd found something up there on the mountain. Something that stayed with him. Does he have a chance? His parents asked the doctor when Jessie was there and Mark was asleep. His parents were holding hands. Can he still beat it? The doctor had shrugged, but it was a smiling shrug. I'd say it'd take a miracle, he answered. But this kid's got a good track record on miracles. My money's on Mark. They kept the cameras away, and the reporters. He was the big story. The cancer kid who'd run away. The dying boy who wanted to climb a mountain. Some people thought he was stupid. Some people thought he was a hero. Everyone wanted to hear his story. But only one person did. Only one person heard all of it. During those days that added up to weeks in the hospital, Jessie sat by his side. I want to tell it all to you, he had said. Everything. And then I want you to tell my story. Jess had shaken her head. I can't. He'd smiled. Yes, you can. You're the only one who could. You were always the good one with words. His smile had faded. I need you to, Jess, before I forget it all. His voice had gotten quiet then. Or in case I don't make it. I need you to. And Jessie, of course, had nodded. For some things, there is no saying no. And so they sat in the hospital, and he told it all to her. They paged through the snow-stained journal and read the words he'd written. They looked at the pictures he'd taken. She saw the broken watch on the train platform, and he told her how mad he'd been. Mad at his life, mad at the time that was running out on him. She saw the dirty little diner, filled with light in a dark city. He told her how sick he'd been, how scared, how angry even at a woman trying to give him kindness. She saw a blurry picture of an angry face with a cocked fist looking right into the camera, and she heard about pain and punches and money left behind and a little dog that would fight anything to protect his boy. She saw a picture of a little hallway with 3 women shrouded in kitchen steam and a picture of a bald and bloody boy in the bathroom mirror, and she heard about the voices of angels and the decision to keep going. She saw a picture of a little girl on a bus, and then a picture of Mark, hat on and smiling, with the world out a bus window behind him. And she heard about shared poems and anger and about how anger only makes sense when you're stuck in the middle of it. She saw a dog by a campfire on a rain-soaked island lost in darkness. And she heard about fear and friendship and warmth in the cold, light in the darkness. She saw red taillights on a green truck driving away, and he told her about lost sons that couldn't be helped, and country music, and the confusion of a kind man not knowing which way was right. She saw a gaping black crack waiting to swallow a dying boy and his dog, and she heard how the boy had been saved by his dog, and then the dog saved by his boy. Finally, at last, she saw a mountain. Glorious, majestic, beautiful. And she heard about peace, about love, about how everything can make sense and be understood. And Jessie listened to every word, and she wondered how she'd ever be able to tell the story. But she knew she would, because her friend had asked her to. He never asked her if she'd told his secret. He never asked the police or his parents about the phone call to the tip line, whether it had been the gruff voice of an old man or the scared voice of a girl. But he knew there had only been one call, and that was enough. Both had known, one had called. They had both tried to help him. In those long hospital days, Mark and Jessie told each other nothing but the truth, except maybe once. It was near the end of the story, at the end of a long day. Visiting hours were almost over, and he was tired. His voice was weak, whispery, like feathers. The question took her by surprise. "Was I close?" he asked. "To the top, I mean. I wanted to climb it, to reach the top. Did I get close?" Jessie swallowed and squeezed Mark's hand in her own. "Yeah," she answered after a few breathless moments. "Yeah, you got close." There's more than one kind of truth. There's the truth that you can measure, the truth on maps and charts and in books and facts. And maybe in that kind of truth, Mark didn't reach the top. Maybe he didn't even come close. Maybe in that kind of truth, he got lost and wandered off the trail and didn't come anywhere close to the top of anything. But in the other kind of truth, the kind you feel in a deeper place, in that kind of truth, the maps don't matter. In that kind of truth, the skinny, bald kid with the disease eating away at him and the little brown dog with one brown eye and one green eye made it farther than they ever should have. They made it farther than minds and maps could measure, but not farther than hearts could imagine. In that kind of truth, Mark totally made it. He made it to the top of every mountain. What Jessie said wasn't a lie. It was just a better kind of truth. That night, in the hotel room, Jess started to try and tell Mark's story like he'd asked her to. She got out a notebook and a pencil and tried to put it all down on paper. "Mark was sick," she began, but it didn't sound right. It didn't feel right. Beau was sitting beside her, his warm body against her leg. No pets were allowed in the hotel, but they'd been given special permission. Mark was sick. Mark was so sick he had to go. She tried again. No. Mark. She tried again, but crossed it out immediately. She couldn't tell his story from afar, she realized. She had to tell his story his way. It deserved that. He deserved that. She ripped the page out of her notebook and let it drop to the floor. She bit her lip and took a breath. She knew what to do. And once she started, there was no stopping. Not until the story of her best friend and his dog was told, and told right. That's the truth. She put her pencil to the paper and started writing. "The mountain was calling me," she wrote. "I had to run away. I had to." The end.